believe this will be an interesting, informative, and timely program. And no doubt all of us are aware of the fact that our society has changed in many ways since September 11, 2001. Some of these changes, of course, are beneficial, others not so much. One of the very obvious changes has to do with the security or protection or heightened policing of our citizens. It is now routine for dogs to sniff our cars while we wait in ferry lines, for federal agents to check us out as we get off the train from points south and north. It's now a cliche that our pre-9/11 notions of privacy are dramatically altered every time we fly on a commercial airline. Closed-circuit cameras watch us as we shop downtown, almost anywhere, walk into most stores, take or deposit money in ATMs, or drive the freeways. Very well-equipped helicopters routinely surveil the border, and perhaps 100 miles south is provided by law. It also seems like the news media daily has stories involving police officer interactions with citizens, often negative. All of us remember last November's pepper spraying incident at UC Davis. All of us also recall last December's removal of the Occupy Bellingham protesters by our local police, dressed in protective shin guards, elbow protectors, helmets with protective visors, all the while holding full-body protective shields. The local police certainly seemed well protected. We have asked our panelists today to help explain exactly what we are being protected from and at what price. We have asked them to help us understand how and why policing has changed over the recent years. How do we achieve balance between officer safety, citizen safety, and basic civil rights? And finally, what the future of policing in our society might look like. We have three excellent panelists. Norm Stamper was a police officer for 34 years. He served as chief of the Seattle Police Department from 1994 to 2000. In his 28 years with the San Diego Police Department, Norm rose quickly through the ranks and as deputy chief served in each of the agency's bureaus. Norm received numerous awards and citations during his career in San Diego, including the Diogenes Award of the Public Relations Society of America for his leadership in the wake of the Rodney King incident and the subsequent Simi Valley trial verdicts. As Seattle's police chief, Norm led a process of major organizational restructuring, creating new bureaus of professional responsibility, community policing, and family and youth protection. Within months, his agency had formed one of the country's best responses to domestic violence. Chief Stamper last appeared before the City Club in November of 2009 when he debated a high-ranking drug task force officer from California on the question of whether or not we should legalize marijuana. Mr. Stamper is well known nationally for the view that we should. Mr. Stamper holds controversial opinions on other law enforcement topics as well. In the November 28, 2011 edition of the Nation magazine titled Paramilitary Policing from Seattle to Occupy Wall Street, he wrote, "The paramilitary bureaucracy and the culture it engenders, a black and white world in which police unions serve above all to protect the brotherhood, is worse today than it was in the 1990s. Such agencies inevitably view protesters as the enemy, and young people, poor people, and people of color will forever experience the institution as an abusive militaristic force, not just during demonstrations, but every day in neighborhoods across the country." Those views are controversial among the force, as you can imagine. Chief Stamper has a PhD in leadership and human behavior from the United States International University. He's a graduate of the FBI's National Executive Institute. Now, Michael Knapp was born and raised in the San Francisco area and is a graduate of San Jose State University and Santa Clara University School of Law. He was appointed a special agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation in 1971. You can count how many years that is ago, and was promoted into the senior executive service as the Deputy Chief, Office of Public and Congressional Affairs in the FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. He's retired in 1997 from the FBI. He's a former police officer with the Milpitas, California Police Department, as well as being a deputy sheriff with the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office. Mr. Knapp was chief of police for the city of Medina, Washington between 1998 and 2003, and was appointed chief for the city of Ferndale in September of 2005. He's a member of the California Bar Association and a graduate of the 100th session of the FBI National Academy, as well as the Foreign Service Institute, United States Department of State. He has served in the United States Army. Tom Schreiber, our third, not our final, one of our three panelists, is a chief U.S. Customs and is a chief with the U.S. Customs and Border Protection in Blaine, Washington, where he currently serves as the public affairs liaison over a 5-state area, in addition to his local management responsibilities for use of force training with the Office of Field Operations. He has performed numerous training duties or enforcement details, including assignment to the first integrated border enforcement team on the northern border, and has been an active firearms instructor for the past 17 years. He began as his law enforcement career on our nation's southern border with the U.S. Customs Service in 1989 in San Ysidro, California. Chief Schreiber graduated from Washington State in 1976 with a bachelor's degree in political science and a commission in the United States Army. He served on active duty for 11 years as a military intelligence officer, including postings to the Republic of Korea and Norway. So our format today consists of 10-minute presentations by each of our panelists, followed by a discussion between the three of them with a possible comment or question from the moderator, followed by questions from our badge-wearing members. And Skip and Don will be taking 2 of these mics and wandering among you later on. So please join me in welcoming our 3 panelists, and we'll start with Norm Stamper. But please, all 3 of you can. Either way, either which you're comfortable with. And that's the one.
Just like in the airline industry, the tallest fellow sits in the center.
Good afternoon. I have just been told that I need to be controversial, which I seem to do with ease. I'll start with a couple of qualifiers. One is I am going to offer criticism of the institution of American policing. I am also going to offer an observation about yesteryear and policing, for example, that was prevalent when I was a brand new beat cop in San Diego in 1966. I think there is a tendency to romanticize yesteryear, a tendency to talk about the old neighborhood beat cop in glowing and favorable terms. And in many cases, that kind of appreciation is richly deserved. I cannot begin to tell you the number of times, for example, that when I worked Old Beat 43 in North Park, a little east and north of the San Diego Zoo, people would come up to me and say, "Do you know Frank Farmer?" Almost every other person I stopped or who stopped me had some wonderful story about what Frank had done to help turn a kid around, to help a family get back on their feet, you name it. I got tired of hearing the guy's name. You know, he's yeah, okay, I'll concede it. He was a really, really great police officer for many, many years on the same beat, which offers, I think, an important insight into perhaps one of the structural problems that we're facing today. I do believe that policing in the 80s and the 90s was moving slowly but steadily towards something called community policing. And I believe that many police departments were embracing a public relations or community relations definition of community policing, which in my view is a shallow definition of community policing. That what is really needed is for the police and the community to engage in an authentic problem-solving partnership. The idea being that if there is a senior partner in that relationship in a free and democratic society, it is the community. That requires intense training. It certainly requires executive leadership, middle managers and first-line supervisors who embrace the concept of partnership with the community and who not only insist that it happen at the street or operational level, but that it actually be supported structurally. My belief is that we have, as a result of two wars, the war on terror and the war on drugs, created a greater and greater and greater distance between citizens and the officers who serve them or seek to partner with them. I believe that that is understandable, if not inevitable, and that what is necessary, if in fact we believe that needs to be turned around so that we can move toward that true partnership, we need to look at the structure of policing. Every time an incident happens, we focus for natural reasons on the incident. A shooting of a wood carver in the city of Seattle. A captured instance of excessive force viewed on videotape over and over and over with racial slurs or ethnic language expressed. We focus on those issues, on those incidents, as well we should, but too often we don't look at the culture that produces that kind of behavior. And if we were to look at that culture, I suspect that we would find that behind it is a structure that is giving rise to that culture. And that structure is the paramilitary, bureaucratic, organizational arrangement. Let me conclude, because I suspect I'm getting close to my 10 minutes, by telling you that in the early 70s, I wrote a senior thesis at San Diego State University entitled "The Community as DMZ, Breaking Down the Police Paramilitary Bureaucracy." My doctoral dissertation addressed that issue quite heavily. In 1992, working for Bob Bergreen, the chief in San Diego, who asked me to do a management audit. I was his number 2 guy. I did surveys, I did interviews, I came back with 22 recommendations, one of which was that we demilitarize the titles of sergeants, lieutenants, and captains. It did not go over well. There were 28 members of that police department. Bergreen gave me 2 months. I asked for 2 or 3. He says, "You got 2 months. Inject the idea into the bloodstream of this organization, which had committed itself to a humanistic, professional orientation to police work, and see whether or not the body rejects it." Well, I've already said it rejected it handsomely. I will tell you that I won approximately 11 converts out of the 2,800. So it was an idea whose time had not come. My theory was anything that we can do to strengthen and improve internal communication will benefit external communication and those problem-solving partnerships as well. So I think the situation today is in some respects better, but in many of the most important respects worse than it was back in the 90s.
Well, I don't disagree with everything you said. I started law enforcement in 1961. My main ambition in life, I grew up with the radio and the TV. Good and bad was defined by the color of hats you wore, and the good guys wore the white hats. I knew early on that I wanted to be an FBI agent and became a lawyer for the sole purpose of becoming an FBI agent. I worked with J. Edgar Hoover. If you've seen the movie, I'm here to tell you it's not entirely accurate. I'm interested in hearing your questions, and I will learn much from you, I know. I'm going to ask and tell you one of the most interesting questions that was ever asked me. I remember it. It was 35 years ago, and I was an FBI agent at FBI headquarters, and if any of you have ever been there years ago, you could tour the building, and an FBI agent would shoot machine guns and things for you, and I did that for a group of about 200 kids. And when I got through, I walked out into this group, and this 8-year-old raised his hand, and he pointed to the top 10 of the most wanted fugitives by the FBI, a poster on the auditorium wall. And he said, "What is that?" And I said, "Well, those are fugitives that we're looking for. We're not able to find them, and we're asking for citizens' help." And he looked at me, and he pondered a moment, and he said, "Well, why didn't you just hold on to them when you were taking their pictures?" Those were easy questions then. You know, when I grew up and Norm grew up, 80% of the households had two families. The main disciplinary problem in school was gum chewing, was running in the halls, not having a hall pass, and the dress code. Today, you know what the major problems in the schools? Drugs, alcohol, suicide, assaults. We've lost 144 students in school since Columbine. We're facing a different culture. It's a very multicultural. As Norm mentioned, we're no longer a melting pot. We're a rich diversity. In this county, we speak dozens of languages the officer has to try to figure out. And each culture has their own norm and their own expectations of law enforcement. And we have to learn to deal with that. Politically and religiously and culturally, the experts tell us now we are the most diverse civilization that ever put foot on the planet, with the exceptions possibly of the Romans. We have new challenges, there's no doubt about that, and certainly one is cultural. One of them is the new technology that we have. Some of it's good, some of it's bad, some of it's here to help you. Global positioning satellites will now help you because E911, when you call 911, if you're unable to finish that call, the policeman will be able to find you by the satellite. We also have cyberbullying, though. And we now cyber bully a person not just in the schoolyard for a few minutes during school session. We bully you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And young people are taking their lives at an unprecedented rate because they can't cope with that. We have cyber crime. We have faceless hackers that can be a nation away that will clean out your personal bank account and run up your credit card, ruin your credit rating, and you'll never know it. And you may have difficulty ever correcting it. And we have flash mobs. Now we can orchestrate a group on tweet and Twitter well in advance of any police response so that they can brawl and riot. The police are playing simply catch up. There is no doubt that we have some old problems as well. Drugs. We have some new designer drugs, spice and ecstasy. Drugs are a problem. They kill about, I think last year it was around 337,000 people died just from drug overdoses last year. We see drugs now into third grade. In fact, the use of drugs between ages 8 and 18 now are more prevalent than the use of alcohol and tobacco in schools. So kids are using drugs more frequently daily than they use tobacco and alcohol. So there must be a good part to that as well as a bad part. Three quick observations. Today's law enforcement officer is a commodity that is disappearing. We have about 750,000 officers. 450,000 are municipal law enforcement officers, and you think, good Lord, I knew we had enough of them. I used to see them in my rearview mirror. I never had any idea we had 450,000 of them. But we have 18,000 municipal departments. 1 out of 11 of every police officer, 1 out of 11 works for the city of New York. Yeah, that's amazing, isn't it? 1 out of 3 officers in this nation works for one of the top 5 cities. 1/2 of all officers work for one of the 12 top cities in numbers. That leaves the other half that services 18,000 departments. Costs about $100,000 to get an officer today. By the time we train him and send him to 18 weeks and put him in field training, by the time he gets his psychology, we have to do a psychological exam. We have to do a polygraph exam, a physical agility, a background, a credit, a criminal check. By the time we have that amount invested in him, there is no one more than the police department that wants him to succeed, and certainly not any more than the city, because most of the cities are small. 80% of the departments in this nation are 10. They can't afford to have officers turn over. But the fact is, Newsweek just conducted a poll. And among the 10 most overrated jobs, police officer. Because people see on TV what they think a police officer is, and they get on the job and they realize it's not what they see. The next step, once you are in the 10 overrated jobs, is that you're in the 10 worst jobs. That's where we don't want to be. That's where the realtors went. The job is many good qualities. We came into it with the idea we do want to help. It's an honorable profession. I've done it for 51 years. And I'm not naive when I tell you that there's nothing more enriching in my life than to have been a police officer and to have helped. But it's also a dirty job. And that's why people are no longer attracted to it. It's dirty. It's not satisfying, because often we find that the problems are bigger than the officer. We're simply putting a bandage on them, and occasionally it's dangerous. 65,000 officers are assaulted every year. We've lost 1,900 officers since we started municipal law enforcement. We average 144 officers lost every year. We just lost one here in the state of Washington. He didn't know that morning that that would be his last day, that he would see his family and wife when he put on his vest. He didn't know when he came up to that truck. That man had also already decided he was going to take that officer's lives. It happened to me. It happened to me within a few years of being an officer, and thank God it worked in the reverse than it did for this officer. When I approached the car in Mountain View at 2 a.m. in the morning, I had no idea the man was armed and was waiting for his wife to come out of the house so that he could kill her. And so that when I knocked on his window and said, "May I have your identification?" he pointed the gun at me. He could have taken my life and his, like the officer here in Washington. Instead, he blew himself away in front of me. It changed my way of thinking. You can see why there are many wives, many families that want their people, they want their child, their daughter or son to go into this profession. But the fact is, it is the thin blue line, and there are many who will find a great opportunity to criticize what they see in municipal law enforcement. There's no justifying Rodney King. There's no justifying John Williams, the woodcarver. There's no justifying that. They were prosecuted. These officers were prosecuted, and or, in the case of Burke, he had to be released. They didn't prosecute him. He should have been prosecuted. But between that time, we lost 800 officers honorably, 72 on 9/11. So I have no illusions about what the profession is. I'm delighted to be in it. I'm proud to be in it. It is my responsibility as a leader that if I find people that don't do the job right, I get rid of them. That's what you expect of me. And we do listen. I'm here and I'm delighted to learn of your concerns. And to the extent that law enforcement can do something about them, that is why we are in this game. And I'm grateful for you inviting me today. I'm grateful to see Sharon Kingsley, who's one of my favorite people. I knew her in domestic violence, sexual assault services, and it was a great lunch.
Wow. I'm deeply honored to be here with these gentlemen, and I'm very privileged to be here in front of the City Club. I know what a prominent group of folks you are, and I'm very honored and humbled to be here. It's true, unfortunately, I am a chief with U.S. Customs and Border Protection. When I got that title, I was trying it out at home with my wife. It got us nowhere. I am not as prominent as these gentlemen. On any given day in North Whatcom County, there's probably 12 of us chiefs running around. But it is an honor to be here. It's already been mentioned. When you look at the border, law enforcement along the border, what's changed in the last 20 years was 9/11. 9/11 was that pivotal moment that changed everything. On September 11th, our nation experienced great tragedy and sorrow. But we also experienced great moments of heroism in the firefighters and police officers that rushed to the scene of the burning buildings. And out of that came a sense of unity in this country, something growing up that I thought I might never see. I remember seeing our president being taken, an attorney general assassinated, a prominent civil rights leader killed. I remember seeing police billy clubs meeting civil rights protesters, National Guardsmen at Kent State, and this country was being torn apart. One of the benefits, if it can be, out of 9/11 was that this country came together like I'd never seen. Out of that sense of unity and that purpose was invented the Department of Homeland Security. We are today the third largest federal department. And we're rather unique. We have a very, very simple mission. We are to protect the American homeland by securing our borders. I'm going to say that one more time. Our mission is to protect the American homeland by securing our borders. It's not to harass travelers. It's not to have a bad day and give you an attitude. We're here to serve you. But we have to keep in mind that our mission was given to us by Congress. In the Boston-Washington corridor, 50 million Americans literally saw the ashen plumes of the fallen towers. They witnessed the attack in Arlington, Virginia, on our military leadership, and were it not for the heroes in United Flight 93, we might have witnessed worse attacks on our civilian leadership. I grew up in Pennsylvania. Those farms, those fields, those forests were where I grew up. And seeing the accident, the crash in Shankstown, Pennsylvania, is just terrible. And we came out of that with a new purpose. But we have to understand who our enemy was. Through all the wars this nation fought, it was always against another nation state. We always had a clear purpose: unconditional surrender, rejection of an invader from a sovereign state, as in Kuwait and Korea, or during the long Cold War, limited actions. What happened on 9/11 was this country was attacked by a non-state entity. Terrorism, when I was serving in the military overseas, we were concentrated on the Red Army faction, the Red Brigades, the Action Direct. These were terrorist groups that were urban guerrilla groups bent on destroying capitalism. What Al-Qaeda did was they changed the rules. They launched an attack against the sovereign state. And now we had a military posture that we could send overseas to attack their sanctuaries. But at home, we could no longer treat terrorism as a criminal action for political purpose. And that was what led to the creation of Homeland Security and my agency, U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Along the southeast part of the United States, Florida is our fourth largest state. They have witnessed and demand border security. They have seen the Muriel boat lift. They have seen refugees washing up on their shores. At one of our attack sites back in the late 70s when I was stationed down there, we literally had bales of drugs washing up on our shores. Think back about the Miami Vice days. The people in Southeast demand border security. Look at the southwest border. Texas and California are two largest states. What's happening right across the line from them in Mexico has been compared to in the papers as a narco war. The casualties in Mexico are approaching the casualties we suffered in Vietnam. Border security is a real concern to them. And then you come up to this piece of heaven in Whatcom County. For those of us that have worked the southern border, when we get up here, we're not transferring. Sorry, we're staying. There's a lot of people that wonder why we need a border here. And there's probably a lot of people here in this room, that ask us that. And I'm very fond of pointing out on the Peace Arch Monument, on the top inscription there, Sons of a Common Mother. We have a shared history with Canada. We are Canada's largest trading partner. Access to the U.S. market is imperative. Canada is our second largest trading partner now. And so access to the Canadian market for U.S. manufacturers is paramount. It is not our intention to stop that trade or to stop that travel. We are doing everything we can through technologies to try to expedite that legitimate travel and trade. What we are trying to focus on is the people that will do this nation harm. That threat keeps shifting. It used to be people were being trained in terrorist camps overseas. They could no longer get here. They were trying to radicalize people that were here. That's the domestic mission that the FBI is focused on. We're here at the border. We are trying to prevent any further harm to this nation. And Whatcom County sometimes seems to forget. We are all aware of, in 1999, Ahmad Rassam, the Millennium Bomber, foreshadowing events to come. There was a foreshadow to Ahmad Rassam. His name was Ibrahim Abu Mazer. In 1996, he applied for entry at the Peace Arch Port of Entry. As a Palestinian lacking documents, he was refused entry to the United States. One night in June of '96, I got a call from one of the rangers at Ross Lake. Ibrahim Abu Mazer was trying to walk down the east side of the Lake, Ross Lake, to come into the United States. At that time, not knowing anything about terrorism or international terrorist attacks, the presumption was people were backpacking narcotics down Ross Lake. And one of the rangers called and asked if we could deploy a canine resource up there. 5 days later, Ibrahim Abu Mazer was caught by the U.S. Border Patrol trying to jog through Peace Arch Park. The next month, he was found in Bellingham at the bus terminal from one of our inland inspections, and again kicked back to Canada. In July 31st of that year, the FBI kicked down the door to a bomb-making factory in New York City and arrested him. He was arrested 3 times here in Whatcom County. So we do have a history with terrorism. When you left your house today, you locked the front door, but you also probably locked the back door. These gentlemen, more than me, can tell you about residential burglaries. It does you no good to lock the front door if the back door is wide open. Whatcom County has been the back door to terrorist probes in the past. And so whether or not that border changes, that's up to Congress. Until then, we're on our job 24/7. And Mike, I was one of those school kids that went and toured the old FBI office, and I collected the target that the agent shot. And it hung in my bedroom for years. So thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to be here today.
Now's the time for the 3 of you to ask each other questions or make comments or elaborate on your points of view.
I'm completely in line with what I've heard, and I'm honored to be with 2 such dedicated professionals. I'd be happy to, if you... I actually agree with everything I've heard today. I think they're sound issues that raise a great opportunity for all of us to have a reasoned discussion about solutions. And Norm is at the forefront of understanding and collaborating with the community to develop these solutions. I concur with that approach entirely. So I'm a great admirer of his and had read his book.
Oh, thank you. I'm wondering if either of you can find it in your hearts or your minds to conclude, as I have, that the drug war has caused more harm than good. We have spent $1 trillion prosecuting the drug wars since Richard Nixon famously proclaimed drugs public enemy #1 and declared all-out war on them, which, as it turns out, was a declaration of war on his own people, from my point of view. Mostly young people, poor people, and people of color. We have incarcerated tens of millions of nonviolent drug offenders over the last 40 years. What do we have to show for it? Drugs are more readily available at lower prices and higher levels of potency than when Nixon declared war on drugs. I am convinced, and so is an organization to which I belong called Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, that just as alcohol prohibition during the 1920s gave rise to enormous lawlessness, literally drive-by shootings. It's okay. It's fine. Literally drive-by shootings in the form of shiny black old Fords and Thompson submachine guns poking out of the back window and so forth, innocent people being shot and killed, overdose deaths in the form of bad bathtub gin. We had essentially the same kinds of problems that we have with that one drug, namely alcohol, that we have today with all the other drugs. And the solution was to end prohibition, to repeal it after 13 years, come to our senses, and see almost immediately a drastic reduction in crime and violence in a variety of cities around the country. Today, 50,000 Mexicans have been murdered in the last 6 years. The Mexican drug cartels, Zetas, La Familia, Sinaloa, Gulf, Tijuana, Juarez, have corridors built into every corner of the United States. Recent estimates put the number at 1,268 cities in the United States whose essentially narcotics trafficking is being controlled, if not dominated, by Mexican drug cartels. They have set up operation in the United States. The kind of profits that are associated with prohibited substances, by definition, create a black market and elevate the prices of what are essentially, with the three top narcotics, weeds. But those weeds represent, depends on whose estimate you buy, $350 billion to $500 billion global drug industry. Let me just conclude by challenging all of us really to think about this. We can either allow greedy and evil people who are engaged in patterns of torture and extortion and kidnapping and murder to regulate drug trafficking, or we can do it ourselves through the government. It's a radical proposition. It's one I think that is fundamentally necessary to improving the health and safety of our communities.
Well, I'll be delighted to answer that. No reasonable person would argue with the fact that we have to examine how we deal with drugs in this country. The fact is, the most abused drug in this country, bar none, was developed in 1916 in a pharmaceutical lab in Germany. It was to be the alternative to an opiate. It was an analgesic that was to try to stop the awful addiction that was at the turn of last century. And this wonderful drug came to the United States in 1939. It was marketed in 1985. It is now the most abused prescription drug on the planet, oxycodone. It's distributed by physicians. They're the biggest drug dealers now in the country. We have to realize that drug addiction is down into the third grade, and that 37,000 people overdosed. I don't mind discussing legalization of drugs as long as it goes along with the understanding this is a medical problem, not a law enforcement problem. This is an educational problem. Let us make sure we get those things in the right order. Make sure that we still talk to the young people about understanding what happens when you take drugs. Because we've lost a whole generation of people now addicted to these drugs. So before we say, let's wholesale legalize this, that will solve the problem, because every expert will tell you, and they just had this on Channel 5 with two former United States attorneys and the head of the local FBI office, the first thing that'll happen, the drug use will go up. You know, it's pretty high right now. I would certainly like to see that we get cooperation from the medical profession before they start to distribute any more of the oxycodone, and I would like to make sure that we have engaged children to understand the effects of this before we make it even more available. But the bottom line is, what we're doing now isn't working, and we need to look at other approaches.
All very good comments and observations. But as a law enforcement officer, I don't get to choose what laws I'm going to enforce today. I get to enforce them all. I do get to exercise my right as a voter, and I exercise that in the privacy of my own home. We also have a war on cancer. Just because cancer is a very difficult enemy, we don't surrender to it. We continue to fight that war on cancer. I will offer the observation that you're absolutely right, the potency of drugs is increasing. And as law enforcement makes it harder and harder to obtain plant-based drugs, we're seeing now more and more synthetic drugs. Ecstasy is an example. It's a popular club drug, kind of replacing cocaine, if you will. It's made by unregistered physicians with unlicensed chemicals in an unclean laboratory. I would not really want to see children putting that in their body. And I think we're going to see more and more synthetic type drugs. They're already trying to synthesize marijuana. Spice and K2 are two of the street names. So I hope your pen isn't put down, because I think you have some more books to write.
Thank you. We have a number of questions from our program committee. We're not going to have time to get to them all, but I want to try a couple, and then we'll have Don and Skip take a mic from each end and visit with you. But one of the questions is, the public is sometimes critical of law enforcement behaviors. What do law enforcers think the most significant areas of misunderstanding and disagreements are? Are there ideas for bridging that gap? Any one of you may take this.
I'd be happy to give that a shot. I think one of the problems that happens as a result of the structure of the institution, not the people, the structure of the institution, is that it creates an us-them mentality within the ranks. Not everyone subscribes to and practices that kind of behavior. I would say most cops don't. But those who do have a disproportionate effect on the reputation of the local police agency. So everything and anything that we can do to create honest conversation between and among police officers within the ranks about their special duties and responsibilities to the public, everything that we can do to foster communication with the community, not for the express purpose of improving the relationship. That's, to my way of thinking, secondary and almost automatic. If you and I engage in a partnership and I do something unilaterally, that partnership has been destroyed or at least damaged. So the idea is that in an authentic partnership, you have people who will not make decisions unilaterally. Use of force, high-speed pursuits, you name it. There's nothing, in my way of thinking, that would stop a police department and its officers from engaging the community in how most effectively to proceed on policy.
I just make one quick observation. Any agency that has as part of its composition, as law enforcement community does, the human element, you're going to have the best of those human qualities. You're going to have compassion. You're going to have caring and a lot of successes. You're also going to have a small element of those human failings within its agency. And I think every agency strives very, very hard to widow those out. Mike talked about the recruitment process, the screening, not just a health screen, the mental evaluations and so on. We try to engineer out that unprofessionalism. We try to do it through training at the academy. We try to do it through post-training after the academy, through hopefully quality leadership and mentoring. And I think there's something you need to recognize that's pretty unique about law enforcement, is that we hold the public trust. We've taken an oath of office. We're in a profession whose cornerstone is integrity. And it's embarrassing when we have officers that do not hold that level of professionalism.
Let me, before, so I want to say this as well. What we see in law enforcement is a lot of idealism when we come in, and then we get a jaded sort of attitude later on. I'm sorry it happens, it does. I want to tell you quickly an experience that I had. I was assigned to a kidnapping. I did several of them in my career, and it was a young girl, and it was July, and it was in Texas. And after the 4th July, she went into her home. It was a hot July day in Texas, and she laid down on the couch. Her father, who was blind, came in later, and the mother, who was partially blind. And in the morning, they couldn't find their daughter. And they found a hole in the screen door. The door had been left open that night, and the daughter was gone. We found the daughter a couple of weeks later. She was dead, and she was in the river. I dealt with the family. I was a young agent, and I dealt with the family. I had dinner with them and met Ross Perot, and we put up $50,000 for anyone that could help us solve this thing. The daughter was considered the angel of light because her father was blind, and she actually walked through flea markets with him. And the mother, as partially blind, also accompanied them, but she could drive barely. We worked that case for months, and I lived with that family, and other agents did. I was really quite taken by him. The father confessed he had raped his daughter that night. She yelled out, "Please, Daddy, don't," so he suffocated her. And then he couldn't drive, so the mother, they put their daughter in a truck and threw her over a bridge. I never believed many people after that. I love people and I love to deal with people, but you must understand the officer sees a lot in his career, and many people don't tell him the truth. And so he starts to distance himself from people. He shouldn't. We should get out of this profession earlier. I tried to get out 3 times. My wife keeps telling me no. Anyway, there is a reason sometimes that officers don't seem to make the personal connection anymore.
Thank you for that. This is for either of you, any of you, all of you. What criteria does the modern police department use to define its primary role in civil society? And where do apprehending criminals and crime prevention fit on the priority list of current practices?
Could you make that any longer?
I know we have wordy people on our committee.
I believe that the top priority in policing is addressing domestic violence in the home, because violence in the home is a precursor to all other forms of violence. If you want to know why people do these horrible things, I suspect if you go back and trace their families' histories, you'll find that. But in general, I think policing is all about stopping people from hurting other people. And individuals who have a passion for that and become police officers can, if we once again think about how we organize to do the work, create all kinds of opportunities to work with wonderful families who don't lie. That's an incredibly dramatic story, Mike, and it just really affected me as you were telling it. And then I think about other families who have lost a child, for example, who are not lying, and who desperately need a police officer with compassion as well as competence. So I think the criteria are shaped and should be shaped by the community we serve. What do you want? What do you need? What are your priorities? I agree completely with something that Tom said, and that is, don't expect your police officers or your police department to stop enforcing a law even if they think it's an unwise law. That is for you to decide. And of course, as Tom indicated, as private citizens, we're part of that process as well.
Okay, maybe it's time to come up and get the mics, but while you're doing that, and one of you touched on this earlier, but the U.S.-Canada border was always open before Homeland Security and fear took over. Do you see us ever being able to go back to that place where we have open borders and more open than now?
Could you
I know,
say that
I'm
again?
sorry.
Tell me the question again.
You were thinking of some other
I
question.
was handing the mic off to Skip
I'm
here.
sorry. The U.S.-Canada border was always open before Homeland Security, and this says fear took over. Do you see us ever being able to go back to that place in that kind of relationship?
The border is still open. It's open 24/7. And actually, in many respects, the job has gotten easier, mainly through the requirement for documentation. Yes, okay, it's documentation. It's a requirement that we look at and scan. It's no longer, hi, how are you today? You know, where are you going, where you live type thing. It has become a little bit more technical. But I think the number one, 9/11 aside, the number one thing that drives the border traffic, in which direction the traffic goes, and how often people go across the border, is the economy. When the U.S. dollar was strong, the border was very busy with Americans going up buying in Canada. Now the Canadian dollar is strong. There's thousands of Canadians coming down to Bellis Mall and Costco, as we all know. The border's still open, and everything we're doing is try to expedite that legitimate trade and travel.
Okay, thank you. We have the microphones. Now it's your turn. We have a question over here. Talk loud, Jane.
Yeah. I'm concerned about the incident here in Bellingham. We have them all over the country with the occupied people that, in most cases, not always, were fairly peaceful protests. Here in Bellingham, we had, they were asked to leave the park where they were, and they didn't get out in time. That night was horrible. It was rainy and miserable. The police came down the next morning with a paramilitary presence. Stun guns, basically, and, you know, they, as Chuck said, they were very well protected. And it seemed to me it was an overreach of what needed to be done in that situation. And I fear that this is what we have become. We have all this military equipment in our police force now, so we have to use it. And I'd like a comment on that.
I made the worst mistake of my 34-year career on November 30th of 1999. I not only authorized, I supported the use of chemical agents against nonviolent and non-threatening fellow Americans who are expressing their First Amendment rights. I am thoroughly ashamed of that decision, but I also need to tell you, I naturally supported it on that day. I supported it on Saturday when I turned in my badge and resigned. I supported it 5 years into my retirement, thinking that was the only thing we could do. It was the cop in me who made that decision, not the chief in me. And if I had really been thoughtful, if I had chosen to reject a militaristic response to protesters of globalization, I don't think the week would have been nearly as bad. We would have had problems. Anarchists, for example, do not, by definition, play by the rules. And they're going to break some windows, and they're going to engage in acts that are really terrifying to nonviolent people. And it is our job, of course, to make sure that the city is safe. But it was a terrible decision, and I am so sorry to say I am seeing my mistake being repeated over and over and over throughout the country. I can't comment, I won't, on Bellingham. What I can say is that what I saw at UC Davis in the form of one Lieutenant John Tuck, who systematically and casually sprayed utterly nonviolent people with pepper spray. Pepper spray is very useful under the right circumstances, and these were not. But he looked like he was watering his lawn or spraying his roses or some such thing. It was truly appalling. Likewise, the white shirt, as NYPD brass refer to the brass, who is spraying a pepper spray against people indiscriminately who are engaged in nonviolent protest. It, I think, is the wrong thing to do. It invariably radicalizes and makes more militant the tactics that come out of demonstrations. And it shifts the focus from opposition to, some of the practices of the 1%. I don't know a single cop, by the way, who's part of the 1%. We have an awful lot in common with those who are protesting. But it shifts the attention away from globalization and the Occupy themes to the local police department. That's exactly what happened in Seattle.
Okay, any further questions?
I would like to say, having lived through Wounded Knee, and I was dealing with Congress during Ruby Ridge and Waco, police have learned that unless there are compelling circumstances that require immediate intervention, just let things go their natural course. I agree with what you said. The right to petition our government is a constitutional right. We should not dishonor it. And we should allow those who want to protest, we should listen to them, we should protect them, for that is the only way we are going to find solutions to the problems that are facing our country today.
Okay, anyone else?
Afraid so. I admit I was a little bit misled by the title of the talk, What Happened to the Cop on the Beat, because I thought that you gentlemen were going to talk about the actual cops on the beat and what happened to them, because they've disappeared by and large. You have touched on the problems of us versus them and to some extent the militarization of the police. What kind of solutions do we have, or do you recommend to get the police departments and law enforcement agents and the Homeland Security agents integrated back into their communities to avoid the us versus them?
I really do think it starts with entry-level education and training. You are a part of, not apart from this community. Here's a skill set, here's a body of knowledge that you simply must possess if you're going to be a police officer in our community. It's also vital that supervision and management support those aspects of the old cop on the beat concept that I think, all would like to see us return to. And that means instead of spending as much time as we are in support of the paramilitary orientation, that we look at the partnership and our problem-solving approaches and methods, structuring opportunities for community to come together with the police department under less than tense and stressful circumstances. I had, for example, 11 advisory groups: an African American community advisory group, a sexual minorities advisory group, a youth advisory group, so on and so forth. 11 of them. And I spent a lot of time with them and always would bring the local beat cop and the precinct commander so that they could hear firsthand the concerns that they had. You know who did not show up? Who did not answer the phone or return calls? The president of the Police Officers Guild. And when you have police unions that are looking at the community as adversarial or unimportant, they're going to be spreading that kind of a mentality among the rank and file in opposition to what your supervisors and managers and executives are doing. So we really do need, I think, to look at how that work is structured and find ways to either get the buy-in of the police guild or the police union, or neutralize their power. And that's a whole nother topic.
Well, we disagree again. I don't know about the us, you and us, them and we. In my neighborhood, the people that I find most often isolating themselves from the other neighbors, one is a computer specialist and one's an engineer, one's retired. I belong to the Boys and Girls Club, and I belong to Domestic Violence, Sexual Assault Services on the commission. I also work with Whatcom Community College. I was on the board of the Senior Center because I'm old. And I try to engage myself in everything, and I try to encourage all my officers. In fact, we have SCOPE, Senior Citizens on Patrol, that are right in the police department. We have a new community-oriented volunteer, and he has his office now. I have a police advisory commission that's wonderful. We do engage the community. It may be individual instances, but you know, sometimes the perception is not the reality, and I never did find that to be the reality. I think, quite honestly, policemen are just about human. And they want to do and be part of the community.
Real briefly, since you raised Homeland Security, I'm finally remembering a time before 9/11 when I was on a special team, and we were sitting along the border up north of Linden, and I had gone up to the door of the farmer and asked permission to hide my vehicle in. And I'll just talk about it. And a little bit later, there was a knock on the window, and they brought me out a homemade piece of peach pie. Now, peach pie is my favorite. And everybody in this room, I sure can understand the term farm fresh. You know, and I was just in heaven that night. But that was back in the day when we did that. We had a personal relationship with a lot of folks along the border. What has changed is growth, just like some of the small cities in Whatcom County now growing up, having the same problem of growth. We have more than doubled, in the Homeland Security, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, we have more than doubled our manpower. We have recruited between 25-30% of our workforce is from the military. They are not from this area. They are moved into this area. They don't have as deep as roots as members here do. They will in time. But I think, you know, just like a small city growing up, you know, some of those days might be in the history books now.
Thank you very much. I guess I'm asking the same question from a different direction, which is what can we as citizens do? So I appreciate the differentiation you've been making between systems and institutions and individual law enforcement officers. So my question is, what is our role in ensuring public safety? And in particular, I appreciated Sheriff Sue Rare's comments today on the radio about law enforcement's enforcement and guardian roles, and then you've also added in the partnership roles. What are we as citizens to do in enforcement, guardianship, and partnership?
It seems like the least controversial. He said I could do this one.
Yeah, authorized it.
Number one, 80% of what a law enforcement officer does is service. About 20% relates to crime. But interestingly enough, and it's called the tyranny of 911, about 100% of an officer's responsibility today is to go and respond to 911 calls. So when he gets there, he finds that he has to go through all of the procedural steps that he would do to investigate a crime, and it doesn't end up to be a crime, but it takes away from him the ability to use his time in other pursuits, one of which is to work with the community. Community policing was popular and then waned, and it's coming back, partly because the government's grants and the money that they used to provide cities has now gone to the fight against terrorism, and that money is not available to hire officers. What a citizen can do is this. Number one, Block Watch has assumed a new ugly name with George Zimmerman and Sanford, Florida. But in fact, it's a wonderful concept, and we use it in our home in Bellevue and in Ferndale, because you start to watch out for each other. And then we start to connect that whole neighborhood with one police officer who then connects neighborhoods as well. It's resource useful for that one officer to be able to service neighborhoods through intelligence and fact exchange than having to go to each home time after time. We ask that you do understand who your neighbors are, inform each other about what's going on. It's also the matrix for emergency management, because should we have a catastrophic disaster, natural or unnatural, you're going to want to know who your neighbor is. So first, form those sorts of relationships. Two, the other part that we encourage people to understand is that you are the eyes and ears. Preventive patrol it probably has little utility anymore. Someone asked about the beat cop and whatever. We still have beats. We always have had beats. We just are in cars now doing the same thing. It's tough to arrest people when you're on a bike or on foot, because we need that automobile there. And it's tough to have all the computerized information that we have access to on a bike. So we put it in a car. Anyway, we're going to encourage you to be our eyes and ears, and to call us and inform us. And so we have hotlines, and we have, because even your suspicions, innocent as they may, when compared and collated with other information, is useful. Stay engaged with your neighborhood. That's how, and we want to work with you. Absolutely. Are you?
I would just briefly echo what the chief just said. Community involvement is very important. U.S. Customs and Border Protection is not in community policing. We're in protecting the borders. But we do have a community along the border community, if you will. CBP has been trying to reach out more and more now in the last several years as we've gone through this growth spurt. We had our first Citizens Academy ended about 10 days ago. We're going to have another Citizens Academy, which will invite members of the community to come and spend several hours with us one night a week for about 7 weeks to understand what it is we do. Border Patrol has a community relation officer whose job it is to reach out to the border community. And again, they're very positive in trying to solicit that information, that those eyes and ears, to see what's wrong and let us know. But I'll be glad to come over for a peach pie anytime.
Now is the appropriate time for us to thank our panelists for the wonderful presentation. And before they leave, we want to make sure that they take with them a copy as a gift, appreciation from the City Club, of Walking Places 2. So thanks you again, and we'll see you next month.